Welcome to Part 3 of Divided by Time. Visit brooksaudiobooks.com for an awesome collection of unique, full-length audiobooks. And be sure to subscribe to be notified when new books are released. Chapter 13. David's condition had gradually improved. The slur in his speech had faded, and he resignedly sipped the broths that Lucy or the nurse brought at regular intervals. The whole house seemed to be perpetually filled with the aroma of simmering chicken or beef tea, and a white card above the doorbell read, "Don't ring. Walk in." No one in the house had seen Maggie Donaldson's confession in the newspaper. At least Lucy was spared that worry. The confession had come out the morning after David's stroke, arriving with the morning milk, lying unnoticed, and eventually being used to start a fire or line a pantry shelf. Harrison Miller next door read it over his coffee. Walter Nola glanced at it on his commute. Nina Ward read it in bed, and that was all. A steady stream of visitors brought small tokens of support, mostly flowers and jellies, but other things as well. David's room housed a growing collection of bedroom slippers, and Mrs. Morgan had even been seen buying soles for more. David, propped up in his bed, would occasionally brighten at these offerings, only to lapse back into a heavy, troubled silence that worried Dick and frightened Lucy Crosby. Lucy was convinced something had happened, something involving Dick. She noticed David's eyes following Dick with something very much like fear. For the first time since that night long ago, when David had brought the tall young man into the house with a letter announcing his arrival, Lucy felt that David had withdrawn from her. She went about her daily tasks feeling a bit hurt, waiting for David to open up. But as the days passed, it became clear that whatever was troubling him, David intended to deal with it alone, and the toll it was taking on him was evident. His recovery was painstakingly slow. Sometimes she wondered if it was because of Dick's growing interest in Elizabeth Nola. She knew he was seeing her every day, although his visits were now just quick stops since he was so busy. She could even tell when he had seen her. He'd come home glowing and almost elated, then race up the stairs and burst into David's room like a burst of sunshine, eager to make up for lost time. She wondered if David felt that Elizabeth deserved a fresh start before committing to Dick. Unfortunately, Dick's slate could never be wiped clean. Then one day, David surprised them both. Propped up in bed, he'd asked for a cigar and was gently refused. Sulking, he was trying to be cheered up by Dick when he suddenly said, "I've been thinking, Dick. I haven't been fair to you. You're wasting away here. Besides," he hesitated, then continued, "we might as well face it. The general practitioner is a thing of the past." "I don't believe that," Dick replied firmly. "Maybe we're just signposts guiding people to specialists, but the world will always need signposts. What I'm saying is this. I want you to go to Johns Hopkins and pursue the specialty you've been dreaming about. I'll be better soon and—" "Call the nurse, Aunt Lucy," Dick cut him off. "He's talking nonsense." "Not at all," David responded irritably. "I've told you. The only reason people come here now is to be referred to specialists, and you know it." "I don't agree with that at all." "If you don't, it's because you're refusing to see the truth." Dick laughed and threw an arm around David's shoulder. "You old fraud," he teased. "You're just trying to get rid of me for some reason. You're not seriously thinking of getting married, are you?" David didn't smile. Lucy, watching him from her spot by the window, noticed his expression and felt a surge of fear. She had only worried about some mental struggle in David, but now realized it might be something far worse, immediate and threatening. She struggled to respond when Dick turned to her. "Are you just going to let him send me off like this, Aunt Lucy?" he demanded. "Exiling me to Johns Hopkins like Napoleon to St. Helena? Are you with me or against me?" "I don't know, Dick," she said, still watching David. "If it's for your own good." She eventually left them to their intense discussion. Although David was ultimately defeated, Dick felt puzzled as he later went down to the office. It struck him that there was an urgent, unspoken reason behind David's persistence. The only explanation that came to mind was that David didn't actually want him to marry Elizabeth Nola. Feeling the need to clarify, Dick brought it up that night, ambling into the room in his dressing gown and slippers, as he often did before bed, for a quick chat. With the nurse downstairs, Dick moved about restlessly, then stopped and stood by the bed, looking down at David. "A few nights ago, David, I asked if you thought it would be right for me to get married, if my situation justified it, and if there was any other reason why I shouldn't. You said there wasn't." "There isn't, of course, if she wants you." "I don't know about that, but whether she does or not is pretty important to me, David." David nodded silently. "But now you want me to leave, to be away from her. You're pretty insistent on it." "I feel like you have a reason for this," David said. David clenched his hands under the sheets, but kept his gaze steady on Dick. "She's a good girl," he said, "but she deserves more than you can offer right now." "That's assuming she even cares about me. I have no idea if she does. So that's why you're pushing this Johns Hopkins thing." "Yes," David replied firmly. "She would wait for you. She's that kind of person. I've known her all my life. She's rock solid. But she's used to a certain lifestyle. Walter Nola is well off. You need to pack up and go to Baltimore. Bring Reynolds here to handle things until I'm back on my feet." Instead of addressing David's suggestion, Dick shifted the conversation. "Of course you know," he said, resuming his restless pacing, "that I have to tell her everything first. I don't need to tell you how much I dread it, but it has to be done." "Don't be an idiot," David retorted irritably. "You'll get a bunch of people talking, and what they don't know they'll make up. I know how they are." "Only her and her family." "Why?" "Because they have a right to know." Seeing David ready to argue further, Dick changed the subject. "I won't do it until we talk it over together," he promised. "There's plenty of time. Now you need to get some rest." When the nurse came in at 11, she found Dick gone and David lying very still, facing the wall. It was the end of May before David started moving around his room again. By then, the trees along the shaded streets were in full leaf, and Mike was relishing that rare gardener's bliss when flowers grew faster than the weeds among them. Harrison Miller, who spent all of April tending to his lawn, could be seen early each morning with a lawn mower or hoe in hand, working in his vegetable garden behind his house. Cars cruised down the streets, their back seats filled with flowers picked from the countryside, and Nola the dog was busy burying bones in the warm, soft soil beneath the hedge. Elizabeth Nola was very happy. Her once vague anticipation had now taken a clear shape. She waited, shyly but contently, knowing that in time, everything she hoped for would come. In the meantime, there was today. At some point today, a worn-out car would pull up to the door, and she would have 5 or 10 precious minutes with Dick before he had to rush off to work or back to David. Once that was over, the day was done, but there was always tomorrow. Occasionally, she saw Clare Tessler at choir practice or during service, but Clare was distant and never sought her out or spoke to her privately. Elizabeth felt a bit sad about Clare, especially when she remembered how hard it must be to care for a man who only responded to mentions of Clare with, "Oh, the tall, blonde girl." Once or twice she caught Clare's eyes on her, filled with hostility. It was as if Clare's gaze said, "I hate you because you know, but don't you dare pity me." Still, Elizabeth sometimes doubted whether Clare's feelings were genuine. Real love, she thought, was something you hid until you were sure it was reciprocated. After that, you could be so proud of it that you might become completely shameless. Elizabeth feared that she might be the type to become utterly shameless. Despite her happy moments, little things still worried her. Wally Sayre, for instance, was always at risk of saying things she didn't want to hear. And then there was Nina. Elizabeth wasn't sure that Nina was entirely happy either. Jim was a real challenge. Sometimes he acted like an adult, and other times more like a kid. You never knew what to expect from him. He was too old for strict rules, but too young to handle everything on his own. Most evenings, he was out of the house, and his name always made his mom sigh in that way that wasn't quite audible. One night not too long ago, Elizabeth had stayed up to talk to him and pulled him into her room for a serious chat. "You should be ashamed, Jim," she said firmly. "You're really worrying Mom." "Why?" he shot back, defiant. I'm old enough to look after myself. You should be taking care of her too, you know." That seemed to hit him, and he looked a bit down. Before heading out again, he offered a somewhat embarrassed explanation. "I tell them where I go, but they'd probably lose it if they knew I was at a pool room, like tonight. I can't exactly tell them, but everything was fine. I met up with Wally Sayer and Leslie at the club before dinner, and we found a fourth to play bridge. We were just playing for tiny stakes. Honestly, we were just gonna keep playing, but then someone brought a guy named Gregory over for a drink. Turns out he's Beverly Carlisle's brother. You know, the actress. He got us into the theater and gave us a box seat. Nothing wrong with that, right?" "Where did you go after that?" she pressed. "It's past 1 in the morning." "We went to meet her. She's amazing, Elizabeth. But if I told them, they'd flip out." She felt stuck because, from his perspective, he was probably right. "I know. I'm just surprised about Les, Jim." "Oh, Les, he just tagged along. He's fine." She kissed him good night, and he left. She lay awake for a long time after that. She wished she could make everyone in her world happy and good during those days. She didn't want anyone making a mess. So the days went on, and the web slowly wove itself into its intricate design. Bassett racing to the west, David in his quiet room, Jim and Leslie Ward looking for fun and finding it in the cluttered dressing room of a local theatre star. Clare Tessler brooding, with whispers going around, though the village maintained its decorum. Gregory dropping by to see Bassett, only to leave with the news that he had left indefinitely. And Maggie Donaldson, lying in the cemetery at the base of the mountains outside Norada, having confessed everything she could to face her maker. Out of all of them, Clare Tessler was the first to make a decisive move, affronted and a bit vindictive, yet perhaps still casting herself in a dramatic role, this time as the bearer of bad news. Beneath it all, though, was an underlying desire to see Dick again and leave such an impression that he'd never overlook her again. On the day David first sat up in bed, Clare visited the house and waited in the sitting room. She was immaculately dressed and carried a parasol. As she waited, she nervously tapped the old office carpet with it, planning her approach. Still, she found it hard to start. "I don't want to keep you if you're busy," she said, avoiding his gaze. "If you're in a hurry." "This is my job," he responded patiently. And waited. "Do you think you'll understand what I'm about to say?" "You sound quite foreboding." He gave her a smile, but she felt a sudden wave of anxiety. "You don't seem like someone with dark secrets gnawing at you." "Dr. Livingstone," she blurted out, "people have been saying things about you that you should hear." He looked at her, stunned and skeptical. "About me? What could they possibly say? That's ridiculous." "I thought you should know. Of course, I don't believe it, not for a second, but you know what this town is like." "I know it's a good town," he said firmly. "But go on. I doubt it's anything serious." She was visibly uneasy and rather frightened by the time she finished. He sat there, quiet and slightly pale, not looking at her, but staring intently at an old daguerreotype of David on his desk. It was a photo Lucy had shown him once, which he had claimed for himself. David at 8 years old, in a small black velvet suit with very thin legs. "I thought you should be aware," she said nervously. Dick stood up. "Yes," he replied. "I needed to know, thank you." Once she left, he returned to the picture. From Clare's first words, he had been struck with the conviction that it was true, that, as Mrs. Cook Morgan's guest from Wyoming had insisted, Adam Livingstone had never married, never had a son. He stood there staring at the picture. His world was falling apart, but he remained steady and upright. "David, David," he thought, "why did you do it, and who am I, what am I?" His immediate thought was about David. Whatever David had done, it must have been with the right intentions. He had to start from that point. If David had given him a false identity, it must have been necessary. Something shameful, something he needed to be protected from. David had likely heard the rumors and then suffered a breakdown. Maybe David's insistence that he go to Baltimore stemmed from a fear that he might hear it too. His mind wandered to Elizabeth. Everything was different now concerning her. He needed to be absolutely sure about his past before he could confess his feelings to her, and this left him feeling utterly helpless. He couldn't go to David as things stood. What about Lucy? He might have gone straight to Lucy, but the phone rang. He answered it, grabbed his hat and bag, and headed out to the car. Years of working with David had ingrained in him the habit of putting the practice's needs before his own. At 6:30, Lucy heard him come in and go into his office. When he didn't immediately show up or rush upstairs to check on David, she stood outside his office door, listening. She had a bad feeling, maybe even a hint of the truth. She tapped on the door and entered, finding him sitting quietly at his desk, his head in his hands. "Dick," she exclaimed, "is something wrong?" "I've got a headache," he replied, checking his watch and standing up. "I'll check on David, and then we'll have dinner. I didn't realize it was so late." But once she left, he didn't move right away. He was painstakingly reviewing everything that confused him, things he had previously accepted without question. David and Lucy's reluctance to talk about his father, the long days in the cabin with David helping him piece together his past, the spring, and the slow recovery that now seemed more like an escape. He barely touched his dinner, heightening Lucy's sense of dread. After the meal, she retreated to her sitting room on the lower floor and picked up her knitting, convinced it was only a temporary escape. She just didn't know from what. Some time later, she heard him coming down from David's room, but he didn't head to his office. Instead, he walked to her door, paused as if uncertain, and then came in. She didn't look up, even when he gently took her knitting and placed it on the table. "Aunt Lucy." "Yes, Dick. Do you think we should talk?" "About what?" she asked, her heart pounding. "About me." He stood over her, looking down with his usual tenderness mixed with determination. "First, I'll tell you something. Then I'll ask you to tell me everything you can." She listened to him with a heavy heart, despite her fear. His voice, though steady, had a strained quality. "I've felt for a while now," he concluded, "that you and David were hiding something from me. I think this is it. You understand, I need to know." Dick, was all she could manage. "I was just about," he continued, his voice unwavering, "to ask a girl to take my name. But I need to know if I even have a name to give her. There are only two possibilities about who I am. Either I'm Adam Livingstone's illegitimate son, which means I have no right to the name or to offer it to anyone else, or I'm—" He made a helpless gesture. "Or I'm someone else entirely, someone who was smuggled out of the mountains and given a false identity." She had always known this moment might come, but she had always envisioned David facing it. It was his responsibility, after all. She wasn't the cause of this secret, nor did she ever approve of it. For years, the fear of being discovered had loomed over her like a constant shadow. "Do you know which one?" he pressed. "Yes, Dick." "Would you really be that cruel, and not tell me?" She stood up, her small frame radiating a dignity fueled by both fear and love for him. "I won't betray David's trust," she said. "A long time ago, I told him this day would come. I was never in favor of keeping you in the dark. But this is David's issue, and I can't take the responsibility of telling you." He was familiar with her determination and unwavering loyalty, but he was desperate. "You know, if you don't tell me, I'll ask David myself. If you go to him now, it could kill him." "It's that serious, is it?" he asked grimly. "So there's something really bad behind it, isn't there?" No, Dick, not that. And you need to always remember this. Everything David did was out of love for you. He's made many sacrifices for you. First, he saved your life, and then he helped you become who you are today. He's been really proud of that. Don't destroy what he's worked so hard for." Her voice trembled, and she turned to leave, her chin quivering. But halfway to the door he called her back. "Aunt Lucy," he said gently. She heard him behind her, felt his strong arms as he turned her around. He pulled her close and, bending down, kissed her cheek. "You're right," he said. "You're always right. I won't burden him with this, I promise. When the time is right, he'll tell me. Until then, I'll wait. And I love you both. Don't ever forget that." He kissed her again and let her go. But long after David had set down his prayer book that night, and after the nurse had rustled down the stairs to grab a late-night snack, Lucy lay awake, listening to Dick's slow pacing in his bedroom. From that point on, he was incredibly gentle with David and did his best to return to his usual cheerful ways. On the day David was supposed to have his first broiled sweetbread, he caught the nurse outside, borrowed her cap and apron, and carried the tray in himself. "I hope you enjoy your meal, Dr. David," he said, in a high-pitched voice that made the nurse giggle in the hall. "I may not be much of a nurse, but I can cook." Even Lucy was fooled at times. He made his usual rounds, sent out the monthly bills, opened and answered David's mail, and shouldered both his own workload and David's without complaint. But when he let his guard down, he seemed serious and distracted. He began to look quite thin, and Lucy often heard him pacing at night. She suspected he rarely, if ever, visited the Nolas. And so the 10th day of David's illness passed, with Elizabeth's smile becoming a bit strained as 3 days went by without the familiar rattle of the old car at the door, with the Valley finishing its 2nd and final week before heading to New York, and with Leslie Ward unknowingly picking up where Claire left off, moving the pattern one step closer to completion. Chapter 14. The Valley, he wasn't entirely sure. It seemed harmless enough at first. Later, reflecting on it, he'd wonder if it was meant to fulfill a specific purpose. But those thoughts came long after. Only when everything fit into place could he see his hand in it. Truthfully, home wasn't making him happy. Nina's chic little house on Ridgely Road had kept her occupied initially. She'd spent endless hours with decorators, pored over countless watercolor sketches of interiors, frequented auction rooms, and made impulsive bids on items she felt she couldn't live without, later asking Leslie to balance her checkbook. She invested significant thought and energy into training and outfitting her staff, even more into persuading them to wear the pricey uniforms she provided. Yet, what she created was more of a house than a home. Sometimes Leslie felt it wasn't even a house at all, but more like a small hotel. They almost never dined alone, and when they did, Nina would say everyone else was busy. After dinner, she'd become restless and want to go to the theater or make a visit. If he declined, she'd sulk all evening. Plus, he didn't care for her friends. Things got to a point where, knowing a lively evening was planned, he'd stay in town, playing billiards at his club or sometimes wandering into a theater, sitting at the back and watching the play with cynical, discontented eyes. The chance encounter with Gregory and meeting his sister brought a fresh sense of interest. Maybe it was the novelty that first drew him in, the odd feeling of being friends with a famous woman whose face smiled back at him from his morning paper or glared in bright, garish colors from billboards. He started visiting her regularly in the afternoons at her hotel, and it was clear she enjoyed it. She often felt lonely, she admitted. He sent her flowers and cigarettes, finding her calm and composed, with subtle lines of past pain appearing occasionally on her face when she let her guard down. She was still. Unlike Nina, she didn't fidget. She listened. She wasn't as stunning as she appeared on stage, but she had a charm about her, and he justified his visits by knowing she didn't place undue importance on them. In her world, men came and went, bringing small tokens, and she accepted them graciously. Next week or the week after, other men in other places would be doing the same things. But sometimes he wondered about her. Did she ever think of Judson Clark and the way he had wrecked her life? What kind of resentment or sorrow lay behind her calm face and that measured voice, so different from Nina's? Occasionally, he met her brother Gregory. Leslie neither liked nor disliked Gregory, but suspected him of being a bit of a bully towards Beverly. When he saw them together, there was a kind of nervous tension, and even though Leslie wasn't particularly perceptive, he could feel a hidden conflict between them. One small incident almost brought this tension to the surface. He mentioned to Gregory, "By the way, I saw you in Haverly yesterday afternoon. You must have mistaken me for someone else. Haverly, where Haverly?" Leslie Ward felt annoyed. There had been no mistake about the recognition. But he brushed it off with that odd sense of solidarity men often have, even with their adversaries. Strange, he said. Guy looked like you, maybe a bit bigger. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling he had said something best left unsaid, and noticed Beverly Carlisle's almost hostile look at her brother. He had an instant vision of the two of them, the man, defiant and somewhat scared, and the woman, worried yet slightly dismissive. Then it was gone. He had planned to go home that evening, knowing the path he was on. But when he got back to the office, Nina was on the line with plans for the night. "We're going to a country inn for chicken and waffles, Les," she said. "It'll be a blast, and I've promised the cocktails." "I'm tired," he replied moodily. "Why don't you let some of the other guys bring the drinks? Feels like I'm always the one stuck with it." "Oh, if that's how you feel," Nina said and hung up. He didn't go home. Instead, he went to the theatre and stood at the back, numbing his guilt with the knowledge that Nina was having what she'd call a heavenly time. After all, it would be over soon. The show, The Valley, had only 4 more days before it moved on. He had already played his minor role in the drama involving Dick Livingstone without even realizing it. That night, he went home to find Nina in bed and very grumpy, and he went to bed in a foul mood himself. But before he fell asleep, he resolved to get a grip. He didn't want things to fall apart, and it seemed they might be headed that way. He decided he wouldn't see Beverly Carlisle again. He stuck to his resolution the next day, bought flowers as usual but this time for Nina, and took them to her. He went home with the orchids, intending them as a peace offering to his own conscience. But Nina wasn't there. The butler informed him that she was dining at the Nolas, giving him a look of barely concealed pity. "Did she say I'm supposed to meet her there?" he asked. "No, sir. She ordered dinner for you here." Even for Nina, that was strange. He grabbed his coat and headed back to the car, then hesitated and returned to get the orchids. Outside the Nola house, he saw Dick Livingstone's car parked by the curb. Inside, in the living room, he found Walter Nola pacing restlessly. "Is someone sick?" Leslie asked, growing more anxious. "Nina's having a meltdown upstairs," Mr. Nola said, continuing his pacing. "Nina, a meltdown." "Exactly," Mr. Nola snapped. "You've really messed things up this time." Leslie placed the box of orchids on the table and took off his gloves, his mind racing. "Care to explain?" "Oh, I will. Believe me, I've seen this coming for months. I'm not making excuses for her. God knows she's terrible at keeping a home, but that's the worst you can say about her. As for you—" "Well—" Mr. Nola's anger was replaced by concern. He lowered his voice. "She got a bill today for a couple of boxes of flowers sent to some actress." When Leslie remained silent, he added, "I don't condone it. You had no business doing it. But if you're going to act like a fool, why not have your bills sent to your office? I suppose I don't need to tell you it was just flowers, right?" "I'm assuming that, but she says she won't come back." Leslie was both alarmed and frightened, not by the threat itself. She would come back, eventually, but by knowing she'd never let him forget it. She held on to grudges with a fierce loyalty. He knew she would never see her part in his minor drift away, nor understand the true innocence of those afternoons spent with tea and conversation. The house was quiet upstairs. Mr. Nola grabbed his hat and stepped outside, calling for the dog. Jim came whistling in, popped his head in and said, "Hey, Les," before heading off. Leslie sat in the dimming light, berating himself for being foolish. What was he even aiming for? You can't have your cake and eat it too. But he felt resentful. He clung to his own innocence and chose to ignore the underlying temptation. About half an hour later, someone came downstairs. Dick Livingstone showed up in the hall. Leslie called him over, and Dick entered. Before sitting down, he lit a cigarette, and in the match's brief light, Leslie noticed fatigue and something new trouble. But his own worries consumed him. "She told you about it, I guess." "I was an idiot, sure. But it was just a few flowers and some afternoon visits. She's a good person, Livingstone, and she's lonely. Since the Clark story, the women here have been really cold to her. They copy her style and demeanor, but don't invite her into their homes." "Isn't the issue deeper than that, Ward? I was thinking about it upstairs. Nina was pretty open. She said you've had your fun and now want to settle down, but she's still young, and this is her only chance. Later on, there might be kids. She acknowledges her part too, but has a clear sense of how it all unfolded. Do you think she'll go back home? She promised she would. They sat smoking in silence. In the dining room, Annie was setting the table for dinner, and the untroubled aroma of fresh garden peas began to waft down the hall. Dick suddenly stirred and flicked his cigarette away. I was going to talk to you about something else, he said, but this isn't the right time. I should head home. He stood up. She'll be fine. Just handle it very tactfully and explain everything thoroughly. What is it? I'd appreciate something to distract me. I'm driving myself crazy here. It's personal. Ward glanced at him sharply. Yes. Have you heard this story that's circulating, the one about me? Well, yeah, Leslie admitted. I didn't pay much attention to it. No one is taking it seriously. That's not the point, Dick insisted. I don't mind gossip. I could care less about idle talk. It's the statement itself that bothers me. I'd say you're the only one who really knows anything about it. Dick made a restless, impatient gesture. One more thing, he said. Nina told you, right? Does Elizabeth know too? I think she does. Dick abruptly left the room, and a moment later Leslie heard the front door slam. Elizabeth, standing at the top of the stairs, heard it too and turned away, her normally strong shoulders slumping slightly. Her world, usually filled with safety, cheer, and kindness, felt off-kilter. First, Nina had come in, white-lipped and shaken, forcing Elizabeth to confront the reality of treachery and the hidden, hurtful actions of men that came to light and caused suffering. And that afternoon, she had to acknowledge something was wrong with Dick. No, between Dick and herself. There was a formality in his speech, an aloofness that disregarded their newfound intimacy. He was physically there, but felt miles away. She tried to feel indignant, but was only hurt. Peace seemed to have definitively left the Nola house. That evening, a sense of relief filled the air when Nina and Leslie finally reconciled. After several tough hours with Nina locked in her room, resisting everyone, she reached out to Leslie at 10 o'clock with a determined calm. As Elizabeth applied cold cloths to her mother's forehead, she began to realize that the relationship between men and women could be incredibly complex and confusing, often blurring the lines between love and hate. Despite everything, love and perhaps routine won out for Nina. By 11, they heard Leslie heading downstairs, moving around in the kitchen and pantry while whistling softly. The servants had left, and the smell of burning bread filled the air. Later, Mrs. Nola, anxiously waiting in the upstairs hall, saw her son-in-law proudly carrying a tray with pitch-black toast and a pot faintly smelling of tea. "Next time you're short a cook, just give me a call," he said cheerfully. Mrs. Nola, brimming with indignation and ready to give him a piece of her mind, decided to retreat to her bedroom, feeling defeated. Late that night, after Nina had forgiven Leslie and settled down to sleep, he went downstairs for a cigar and found Elizabeth sitting alone, a book on her knee, her eyes filled with wistful curiosity. "Lost in thought or just sitting?" he asked. "I was thinking. Building castles in the air, huh? Just make sure you pick the right guy for them." He felt foolish as soon as he said that, sensing that Nina's family might have doubts about her choice. "What I mean is," he added quickly, "don't make a mistake and choose Wally Sayre. Find yourself a man while you're at it." "I would, if it were that simple." "Come on, Elizabeth, don't be ridiculous." He perched on the arm of a chair, watching her intently. "So, what's this rumor the Tessler girl and the others are spreading about Dick Livingstone? You're not letting it get to you, are you?" "I don't buy it for a second, and even if it's true, it doesn't change anything for me." "Our girl," he said warmly, standing up. "You should probably head to bed, young lady. It's nearly midnight." She stood, but didn't make any move to leave. "Actually, Leslie, what worries me is that he might hear about it." "He already has, sweetheart." He expected her to look alarmed, but she seemed relieved instead. "Honestly, Les," she said, "I was worried. I'm really into him. It just hit me suddenly and I couldn't help it. I thought he felt the same way about me." She paused and looked at him, searching for understanding, and he nodded seriously. "But today, when he came to see Nina, he avoided me. I was waiting in the hall upstairs, and he just said a word or two and went on his way." "Poor guy," Leslie said. "You have to understand, he's in a tough spot right now. But here's something to think about before you go to sleep. If you ask me, he's avoiding you not because he cares too little, but because he cares too much." Long after a remorseful and subdued Leslie fell asleep, his arm draped over Nina's sleeping form, Elizabeth stood wide awake on the small balcony outside her room. In the daylight, she could see the Livingstone house from there. Now it was obscured by darkness, but she could make out the faint outline of an upper window. She shyly kissed her fingertips and whispered, "Good night, dear." Chapter 15. 10 days later found him only just reaching Chicago, hobbling around his hotel with a sprained knee. During the same period, Nina had returned to the small house on Ridgely Road, coming to grips with the early lesson of married life that winning over a man is only the first step, keeping him is the next. It was on that day that he finally felt well enough to continue his trip. The wait had been agonizing for him. Despite the fact that there wasn't any new development in the story yet, the Tribune had run a photo of the cabin where Clark, according to the Donaldson woman, had spent the winter after the murder. There were also typical sightings of Clark in places as varied as Seattle and New Orleans. By the following Sunday, with no new updates, he guessed that the trail had gone cold. He made sure to confirm this before heading west, visiting the offices of major newspapers and catching up with old colleagues. The Clark story had fizzled out for now. They had published a slew of pictures of him, so someone might still recognize him eventually, but after 10 years, any lead would be pretty stale. The place had changed a lot in that time, too. 5 years ago, oil was discovered, and many long-time residents had cashed in and moved away. The town had grown like crazy, just as all oil towns do. Feeling relatively satisfied, Bassett caught the night train out of Chicago and spent the next day traveling through Nebraska, soaking in its fertile, rich landscape. By the afternoon of the second day, he switched to a branch line, heading toward the mountains and Norada, transforming into a relaxed, cigar-smoking bundle of curiosity. "Has the railroad been here long?" he asked the conductor. 4 years. Norada must have been pretty cut off before that. 30 miles in a coach or a Ford car. "I was reading the other day," said Bassett, offering a cigar, "about the Judson Clark case. Have a smoke?" "Got time to chat for a bit." "You a journalist?" "Oil well supplies," Bassett replied smoothly. "Well, this article mentioned some woman making a confession. Sounded sketchy to me." "Let me explain." The conductor took a seat and bit off the end of his cigar. "I knew the Donaldsons well, and Maggie Donaldson was an honest woman, but here's how I see it. When Donaldson died, she was pretty much alone. The executors of the Clark estate kept her on the ranch, but when everything got settled 3 years ago, she had to leave. That really broke her. She always insisted he wasn't dead. She kept the house exactly as it was, and my wife says she even had his clothes ready and everything. That makes the story sound true, doesn't it? Not exactly. I think she went from hoping to moping, you know. She went into town for letters regularly for 10 years, and the postmaster said she never got any. She got hurt in front of the post office. People around here say she's been a bit out of it for the last year or two. But they found the cabin. Yeah, they did, said the conductor calmly. The cabin wasn't a secret. It was an old fire station before they built the new one on Goat Mountain. I spent a month there once with a guy who wanted to take pictures of bears. We found one, but it charged at the camera, and I would still be running if I hadn't come back to civilization. After the conductor left, Bassett fell into deep thought. So Maggie Donaldson had gone to the post office for 10 years. He tried to imagine those tireless, hopeful trips through spring mud and winter snow, always in vain. He didn't believe for a second that she had lost her mind. She had been faithful to the end, as some women were, and just like before, her faith had ultimately been her undoing. He marveled again at how some people could inspire unwavering loyalty. They might spend their lives tearing down ideals and shattering illusions, yet there was always someone willing to rebuild and someone faithful enough to admire them. He felt a bit overwhelmed by Norada's size and bustling activity. The streets were paved and well lit. There was a park, a public library, and the clerk at the commercial hotel even asked if he wanted a private bath. The new development was beneficial in one way. In the old Norada, a newcomer might have faced friendly but prying interest. In this more grown-up and self-focused community, a person could come and go without much notice. He also had some other advantages. The people he thought of as the pack would have started at the Clark Ranch and the cabin. He'd get to them eventually, but his plan was to begin on the outskirts and work inward. "Been here long?" he asked the clerk at the desk after a relaxed meal. The clerk grinned. "I got here 2 years ago. Never met Judd Clark. To get to the Clark place, take the road north out of town and keep straight for about 8 miles. The road's good now. You guys have worn it smooth." "Must have written that down and memorized it," Bassett said, impressed. "What's the deal with the Clark place, and why should I go there? Unless," he added, "they serve a good meal." "Sorry." The clerk looked at him sharply, then seemed satisfied and grabbed a pen. "You'll hear the story if you hang around here long enough. Anything else I can help you with?" "Yeah, fire the cook," Bassett replied, then walked away. He spent the evening reviewing his notes and planning his next moves. The next day he got lucky. His elderly chambermaid had lived in the area for years. "Ever hear of any Livingstones around here?" he asked. "Why, yes. There used to be a Livingstone ranch out at Dry River," she said, pausing with her carpet sweeper and looking at him. "It wasn't much of a place back then, although you wouldn't know it now. I sold 60 acres about 8 years ago for $2,000, and now the folks who bought it are making $1,000 a day from it." She sighed. It was like she had a brush with fortune and missed it. Sometimes opportunity just whispers by, and other times it kicks the door down. "I'd be a millionaire now if I'd held on," she said gloomily. That day, Bassett rented a car, agreeing to drive it himself and return it in good shape, with the garage providing the tires. "I just gotta say one thing," the owner said as Bassett tested the gears. "I don't know where you're headed, and it's not really my business. Out here in oil country, where folks are backstabbing each other for new leases, we tend to keep to ourselves. But if you're thinking about taking that car over the back road to the old fire station where Judd Clark supposedly spent the winter, let me warn you. We've had 2 cars stuck up there for a week, and it looks like the only way to get them out is with a cyclone." "I'm going to Dry River," Bassett replied curtly. "Dry River's dead on if you're after oil. Go easy on the brakes, man. We rely on those out here." Dry River was a small settlement off the railroad. It had 2 intersecting dirt roads, a handful of houses, an empty saloon, and 2 general stores. He picked one store at random and found out that the old Livingstone place had been sold 10 years ago when Adam Livingstone died. His brother from the east inherited it, the storekeeper said. He came down and sold everything, lock, stock, and barrel. Not that there was much, just some cattle and horses and the stuff in the ranch house, which wasn't worth much. There were a lot of books, donated by his brother for a library, but we don't have a building yet. The railroad hasn't reached this far, and unless we strike oil, it never will. The brother inherited it, right? Do you know his name? I think it's David. He was a doctor back east. So Adam Livingstone wasn't married? No kids? He wasn't married. He was kind of a hermit. He'd been dead for 2 days before anyone found him. My wife went out when they discovered him and got him ready for the funeral. He was buried before his brother arrived. He glanced at Bassett shrewdly. The place has been checked for oil, and there's a dry well on the next ranch. I tell my wife, nature's like the railroad. It stopped before it got here. Bassett's doubts were gone. The story was there, ripe for the taking. So ready, in fact, that he almost suspected his luck. And the feeling that things were coming too easily stayed with him during his interview with the storekeeper's wife in the small house behind the store. She was chatty, eager to talk about the one noteworthy event in an otherwise dull life, and she wasn't curious about the reason for his questions. "Adam Livingstone," she exclaimed. "Of course, I remember. I went out as soon as we heard he was dead, and stayed there until everything was over. I know as much about him as anyone here, because I had to go through his papers to find out who his family was." The papers weren't particularly interesting. Cancelled checks, paid bills, and a big bundle of letters, all from a brother named David and a sister who signed herself Lucy. There was also a sealed one, addressed to David Livingstone, to be opened after his death. She had her husband message David, but he arrived too late for the funeral. "Do you remember when that was?" "Let me think. Adam Livingstone died about a month before the murder at Clark Ranch. We time most things around here from that event." "How long did David stay?" Bassett tried to sound casual, but she seemed eager to talk. "Maybe 3 or 4 weeks. He hadn't seen his brother in years, and it looked like there was no love lost between them. He sold everything quickly and went back east." She glanced at the clock. "My husband will be home soon for dinner. You're welcome to join us." The reporter thanked her, but declined. "It's an interesting story," he said. "I didn't mention anything to your husband because I wasn't sure I was on the right track. But the talk about David and Lucy rules this man out. There's some property waiting back east for an Adam Livingstone who came to this state in the 80s, or for his heirs. You can confirm he wasn't married." "That's correct. He didn't like women. Never had one around. Just 2 ranch hands who are still at the Wassons' place and himself, that was it. The Wassons are the folks who bought the ranch." "No housekeeper then, and no illegitimate son, as far as any evidence went. All those lies in the doctor's office, all that fake openness, were useless. The man in the cabin that Maggie Donaldson reported had been David Livingstone. Somehow, he had gotten Judson Clark out of the area and taken him east. The details didn't matter just now. The key point was that David Livingstone had been around when Maggie Donaldson was nursing Judson Clark in the mountains." Bassett leaned back and thoughtfully chewed the end of his cigar. The sheer audacity of the plan that saved Judson Clark impressed him, but the sloppy cover-up and how easily he had tracked it made him suspicious. He stood up and tossed his cigar away. "You mentioned that this David went east after selling the place. Do you remember the town?" "Somewhere in eastern Pennsylvania. I can't recall the name." "I need to confirm that I'm wrong before moving forward," he said, grabbing his hat. "I'll check in with those guys at the ranch and then head out. How far is it?" It was about 10 miles along a rough road that demanded all his attention, leaving little room for coherent thoughts. But the feeling of triumph lingered. He had found Judson Clark. Chapter 16. Dick knew he couldn't see her without losing his cool. He was determined to stay composed until he had something concrete to offer her, but this resolve didn't make him any less miserable. He worked hard all day and crashed into sleep at night from sheer exhaustion, only to wake up each morning with a nagging sense that something was off. Before he was fully awake, the certainty and dull ache of his reality would wash over him, and he'd lay there, staring at the ceiling, gathering the will to face another day. There was no hope for immediate relief, even though David hadn't mentioned Dick's departure again. David was incredibly weak, and seeing him sometimes caused Dick almost physical pain. But there were fleeting moments when David would muster a glimpse of his old energy, demanding tobacco, grumbling about his meals, and sparring with Harrison Miller during cribbage games much like he used to. Then one afternoon in late May, everything changed, and it was Elizabeth who forced Dick's hand. After 4 days without seeing her, he found her alone in the waiting room, looking scared and almost unable to speak. He couldn't find his voice either at first, and when he did, it came out rough and hoarse. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his tone almost eerily deep. "That's what I want to know, Dick." Suddenly a wave of anger hit him, not at her, but at everything around them. "Wrong?" he growled. "Yes, everything is wrong." Elizabeth's face went pale. "What have I done, Dick?" As quickly as the anger came, he was overcome with shame and contrition. He was startled, too. What have you done? You're the only thing that's right in this messed-up world." He caught himself, set down his bag, and closed the door to the hall. He stood at a safe distance from her, crossing his arms to keep his composure. "Elizabeth," he said seriously, "I've been a selfish idiot. I stayed away because I've been dealing with some stuff. I'm still dealing with it, actually. But it's got nothing to do with you, not directly anyway. Don't you think I already know what it is?" "You do know." He was too wrapped up in his own thoughts to notice the new maturity in her face, a sense of deep passion and care. To Elizabeth, he wasn't her man, who constantly judged matters of life and death, but a worried boy, blowing a small issue out of proportion. "People will always talk," she said. "You just have to ignore it. You should be above that kind of thing." "But suppose it's true. What difference would it make?" He moved quickly towards her. "There might be more than that. I don't know, Elizabeth," he said, locking eyes with hers. "I've always thought I couldn't go to David now." He felt the urge to tell her about his lost youth, that strange trick his mind played to hide those lost years. But he couldn't. He had a deeply human fear of appearing abnormal in her eyes, similar to but much greater than worrying if his tie was too flashy. But more than that was his new fear that something dark and unresolved lay hidden in his memories. "I need you to know this, Dick," she said. "Nothing, no gossip or anything, can change how I feel about you, and I've been really hurt. We were such good friends. I've been lying awake, worrying." That hit him first in the heart, and then in the head. This might be all he was ever going to have. At this moment, with that sweet and earnest child, so bold in her honesty and straightforwardness, she was his whole world as she sat in that faux mahogany chair. "You're all that matters," he said. "The only real thing in a world falling apart. I think I love you more than anything else." For the next few days, he embraced what he had without questioning it or thinking about the future. He was unbelievably happy. He tackled his work with his usual dedication and precision, thanks to experience that allowed him to continue as if nothing had changed. He listened to endless complaints and lists of symptoms, and wrote out those hurried prescriptions with hopes of a cure. Not that Dick had any strong belief in those standard doses, but he felt that expecting relief was half the battle. Yet that was just his mind at work, operating in a body that carried out daily tasks and maintained an impressive facade as Dr. Richard Livingstone. Deep inside, his heart acted uncontrollably, singing, dreaming, and skipping a beat whenever he saw a certain small figure on the street, completely defying his professional demeanor. And truly, that's all any doctor knows about the heart, until they fall in love. He even started wondering if he had misinterpreted the situation, but David's inherent integrity reassured him. David could never do anything wrong or unworthy. He wished he could be more like David. This newfound humility extended to his feelings for Elizabeth. Sometimes, in his room or while shaving in front of the bathroom mirror, he questioned what she saw in him. He now shaved twice a day, leaving his face so irritated that he had to apply cream at night, to his quiet embarrassment. When he got dressed in the morning, he found himself taking a final look in the mirror once or twice, wishing he had some outstanding feature she might admire. He refused to overthink things. For a while, he was content just to feel, to be incredibly happy, and to take each day as it came without looking ahead. The old house seemed to brighten with his mood. Lucy's window boxes had never been more vibrant, and Minnie's bread never so perfectly light. Sunlight flooded into David's room, making the nurse's white uniform so dazzling that David joked he was getting snow blindness. David himself was getting better rapidly. Each passing day made him feel more secure. If there was really a reporter from the Times-Republican after Dick, he would have shown up by now, he would have shared the story. No, that bridge was safely crossed. And Dick, he was happy. David listened with a faint smile from his bed whenever Dick came whistling into the house, bounded up the stairs 2 at a time, sang in the shower, or teased the nurse with his lively chatter. The boy was truly happy. He would marry Elizabeth Nola, and everything would be as it should be. There would be the fullness of life, young voices filling the house, toys on the lawn. Eventually, David would pass on, but Dick. On Memorial Day, They made a big event of getting him out of bed. Once he was settled by the window in his big chair with a blanket over his knees, Dick came in with a large box. As he unwrapped it, revealing layers of paper and a series of smaller boxes inside, David's curiosity grew. "What nonsense is all this?" David demanded playfully, his eyes shining with a childlike expectation. "Hand me that box, probably more slippers." Eagerly, he worked his way to the heart of the package. It was a cigar. Later, once the comfort of good tobacco had relaxed him into a gentle drowsiness, and Dick had left for his evening calls, Lucy walked into the room. "Elizabeth Nola is downstairs," she said. "I told her you wanted to see her. She brought some chicken jelly, too." She tidied up the tissue paper around him and gave the room a critical once-over. She often thought the nurse wasn't as neat as she could be. Then she went over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. "I don't want to worry you, David. Not now, but if he's going to marry her." "Well, why shouldn't he?" he asked gruffly. "A good woman would be one more anchor to windward." She found herself unable to continue. David was always a mystery to her when it came to Dick. He had been since the beginning. But she realized she had to tell him about the buzz in the village and the subtle shift in the way people seemed to view Dick. For one thing, he wasn't as busy as he used to be. She left the room and sent Elizabeth in to see David. In her love for Dick, Elizabeth now embraced everything connected to him, his worn-out coats, his noisy car, and his family. She had a deep, unspoken wish for their approval, to be liked and wanted by them. Not that there were any words for it, because both she and Dick were currently content with their love and were keeping it very private. "Well, well," said David, "and now the tables have turned. I'm the patient and you're the doctor. And what good medicine you are, my dear." He looked her over approvingly, but also with some speculation. She was a small and delicate vessel to carry all the dreams he had woven for Dick, dreams born from his own solitary and unfulfilled life. She was even more than that. If Lucy was right, she was now part of an experiment that started as a professional interest for him, but had become essential to his life. She seemed a bit shy, he noticed. She was nervous and excited, but undeniably happy. Her mix of emotions, combined with her professional demeanor, made her seem rather prim at first. But soon, she was sharing all the village gossip, even though David suspected she was really listening for Dick's car. When she got up to leave and extended her hand, he held it between both of his. "I haven't been observing symptoms all these years for nothing, my dear," he said, "and it seems to me someone is very happy." "I am, Dr. David." He patted her hand gently. "Listen," he said, "I don't know anything, and I'm not asking questions. But if the Board of Trade or the Chief of Police came to me and asked, 'Who would be the best wife for a young man who's important to the community?' I would have said, 'Gentlemen, there's a Miss Elizabeth Nola who—'" She suddenly bent down and kissed him. "Oh, do you really think so?" she asked breathlessly. "I love him so much, Dr. David, and I feel so unworthy." "So you are," he said. "So is he. So are all of us when it comes to a great love, child. We're never quite what the other person imagines us to be. It's when we don't account for what the scientists call a margin of error that we get into trouble. I wonder," he watched her closely, "do you young people ever consider a margin of error?" "I only know this," she said steadily. "I can't imagine ever feeling any less. I've never thought much about myself, but I know that. You see, I think I've loved him for a long time." After she left, he sat in his chair, staring ahead and thinking. Yes. She was steadfast. She had loyalty, a patience that was hard to find, and a genuine humility. It was up to Dick now. He faced the prospect of doors opening to his past, filled with flooding memories, confusion, despair, and maybe even real danger. And then what? Routine. That's all he could rely on. The brain, just like the body, thrived on habits. Good can be a habit, and so can bad. As a man thinks, so he is. All through his childhood, and for the past decade, Dick's mental habits had been positive. He grew up surrounded by love and taught responsibility. Even if those doors opened, it would only be the negative thinking from a few reckless years that he had to fight, and maybe those doors would stay shut. Lola had said happiness would keep them closed, and Dick was happy. At 5 o'clock, the nurse came in with a thermometer, finding him asleep in his chair, mouth slightly open, snoring loudly. Hearing Dick in the hall below, she went to the top of the stairs and put a finger to her lips. Dick nodded and went into the office. The afternoon mail was waiting for him, and he began to open it without really paying attention. His mind was elsewhere. After taking a step he was so determined not to take, things like Clare Tessler's story, David's unease, and his own doubts were no longer just his personal concerns, or even just about Elizabeth and him. They'd become critical to her entire family. There was no escaping the issue. What used to be just his bad luck or misfortune was now critical to a whole group of previously unaffected people. He would have to clearly explain the situation to them and let them decide. And he needed to clarify it for both them and himself. He'd had his weak moments. He knew that some men, many men, approached marriage with certain hesitations, planning to start fresh. He understood why some things were kept hidden. He didn't once compare his situation to theirs, even when the temptation to grab his happiness was at its peak. It wasn't just a simple misstep, but something hidden and perhaps terrifying behind David's strange new behavior. It was also connected to the gaps in his memory that he tried to analyze with professional detachment. The mind in these cases creates defenses, not against trivial things, but against the unbearable. For the past couple of days, he faced the reality that not only did he need to try to recover his past, but that doing so might cruelly and completely separate him from his present. Holding an unopened letter, he looked around his office. This place was his. He had fought for it and worked for it. He felt an almost physical sense of unseen hands trying to drag him away from it, from David and Lucy, and from Elizabeth. And he found himself holding on desperately to all of them, clinging to the ordinary life he knew. He shook himself and began to read the letter. "Dear Doctor, I've tried to see you, but I understand you're laid up. Burn this as soon as you've read it. Louis Bassett has headed to Norada, and I advise getting the person we discussed out of town immediately. Bassett is planning something. I'm not signing this fully for obvious reasons. G." Chapter 17. In the summer, until the family moved to the main coast, the colorful awning over the terrace signaled that the Sayers were in residence, as Harrison Miller would say. Once designed as just a summer home, Mrs. Sayer now used it year-round. Unlike the townhouse, this place held no memories of the harsh days before she became a widow. Mrs. Sayer was short and heavy, with impeccable taste in home decor, but absolutely none in fashion. "I never know," Harrison Miller joked, "if I'm looking at Anne Sayer or just an awning." Mrs. Sayer wasn't particularly sharp or clever, but she was kind-hearted, open-minded, and motherly. She enjoyed hosting fun little parties, where she would wear her wildly mismatched clothes in every color and cut imaginable. She loved spoiling the girls she liked with gifts, and was eager to see Wally marry a nice, dependable girl and settle down. Between her and her son existed a quiet, undemonstrative bond. Seeing him through clear-eyed realism, she harbored no illusions about him. She knew she didn't know everything about how he spent his time, and had no desire to pry into his personal life. "He spends a lot of money," she mentioned to her lawyer once. "Probably in all the usual ways. But he isn't quite like his father. He has genuine affections, which his father lacked. If he marries the right girl, she could help him become something great." She first suspected he was interested in Elizabeth Nola when the head gardener told her Mr. Lassorder had ordered roses to be sent to the Nola house. Initially annoyed, as the roses were reserved for an upcoming dinner party, she then reconsidered. "Fine, Phelps," she said. "Do it, and I'll select a plant to send to Mrs. Nola as well. After all, why not the Nola girl?" She had been raised with great care, even if the Nola household had its awkward moments, and she was a sweet and gentle girl, especially charming in church. Wally had certainly been spending a lot of time with her. She visited the greenhouses and then went upstairs into the rooms she had envisioned for Wally and his future bride. For once, she felt content. She was a lonely woman, her own grandeur setting her apart from the neighborly connections she longed for. She had to extend invitations just to have company. Standing in the doorway of the boudoir, her mind buzzed with ideas for draperies and furniture. She dreamt vaguely of bringing new, young life into the grand house, imagining an end to lonely evenings, filled instead with the hustle and bustle of family. She wanted Wally to settle down. She was exhausted from paying his bills at various clubs and hotels, and tired of him spending mornings in bed while his valet mixed things to help him get it together. After 4 years of reckless behavior, she felt that at 25, he should be done with it. The south room could be the nursery. On Memorial Day, she did her part for the community, sending flowers to the cemetery and standing through a chilly hour of services where taps were played over the graves of those who had died in 3 wars. She was thankful that Wally had come back safely and believed that if he would just marry and settle down, everything would be fine. The service didn't move her emotionally. She was one of those women who saw war, politics, and even religion only in terms of their impact on her and her affairs. She had taken the German invasion as a personal misfortune. She stood stoically while the village soprano sang the Star-Spangled Banner. By the end of the service, she had decided that Elizabeth Nola was the solution to her problem. Feeling a bit pressured, Wally had lunch with his mother at the country club, but she found him evasive and not particularly joyful. "You're 25, she said towards the end of their discussion. "By 30, you'll be too set in your ways, too hard to please." "I'm not going to marry, just for the sake of it, Mom." "Of course not, but you have a decent amount of money now. You'll have much more when I'm gone, and money comes with responsibility." He glanced at her, then looked away, tapping a fork on the tablecloth. "It takes 2 to make a marriage, Mom." He shut down after that, but she had got the information she wanted. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, the Sayer limousine stopped in front of Nina's house, and Mrs. Sayer, dressed in bright pink and sporting a purple hat, got out. Leslie, lounging by a window, made the announcement. "Here comes the Queen of Sheba," he said. "I'll head upstairs and nurse a headache if you don't mind." He kissed Nina and left hastily. He was feeling particularly affectionate toward Nina these days, and rather smugly virtuous. He liked to think his conscience had brought him back, rather than the real reason, a good scare. He practically exuded righteousness. This was the great lady's first visit, and Nina was quite thrilled. These were the moments that justified having trained servants with Irish lace aprons, and decorators who devised perfect backdrops for one's personality. "What a lovely room," Mrs. Sayer exclaimed. "And how do you keep your maid so immaculate?" "I must have excellent service," Nina replied. "The butler's off at some parade or something. It's so nice of you to come see our little place. It's a bit of a doll house, of course." Mrs. Sayer sat down, a bit of a jarring presence in the room, but a substantial and not unkindly woman nonetheless. "My dear," she said, "I'm not just making a social call. I came to talk to you about something. About Lassorda and your sister." Nina felt a mix of satisfaction and victory. "I understand," she replied. "Are you saying they have feelings for each other?" "Lassorda does. This is just between us, but I'll be honest, Nina. I want Wally to get married, and soon. You know how tempting the single life in the city can be. I want him to settle down. I'm feeling lonely too, but that's secondary." Nina paused. "I'm not sure about Elizabeth. She likes Wally, as everyone does, but lately—" "Yes. Well, in the past few days, I've been wondering. She doesn't say much, you know, but she's been spending time with Dick Livingstone." "Doctor Livingstone. That would be a huge mistake." "Yes, but that's how she is. She's not ambitious. We've always expected her to make a choice like that, at least I have." Half an hour later, Leslie upstairs peeked over the railing to see if there were any signs of Mrs. Sayer leaving. The door was open, and it seemed Mrs. Sayer was getting ready to go. She was saying, "This means a lot to me, Nina dear, and I know you'll handle it delicately. I haven't emphasized the material benefits, but you might mention them to her." A few moments later, Leslie came downstairs. Nina was sitting alone, deep in thought, with a look of calculation on her face. "Well," he said, "what were you two up to?" Up to nothing at all. He looked at her intently. Listen here, Nina, he said. Stay out of Elizabeth's decisions. From what I can tell, she's making a pretty good choice, so don't interfere. Chapter 18. Who was G? What did Bassett's departure from Norada have to do with David? And who was the person that needed to be gotten out of town? He didn't go upstairs. Instead, he took the letter into his private office, closed the door, and turned on his reading lamp as if the light might help him think more clearly. Rereading the cryptic sentences, he started to piece things together. Someone named Bassett, whoever he was heading to Norada to cause trouble. Another person, signing as G, was warning David about it. But the trouble wasn't aimed at David. It was aimed at someone else, someone who needed to leave town. David had been trying to get this person out of town. The warning was actually about him. His first instinct was to go to David, and months later he would wonder what might have happened if he had. How far could Bassett have gone? What decision would he have made once he knew the truth? For a short time, Dick had the power to change things. He went up to David's room, with the letter in his pocket, and talked casually while debating the issue internally. But David had a headache and a slightly elevated pulse, so that crucial part of the conversation never happened. Dick had always linked David's illness to stress, but now he suspected a specific trigger, a person, a telegram, or a phone call. After dinner that night, he went back to the kitchen. "Minnie," he asked, "do you remember the afternoon Dr. David got sick?" "I'll never forget it," she replied. "Did he get a telegram that day?" "Not that I know of. He often answers the bell himself." "Do you know if he had a visitor, just before we heard him fall?" "He had a patient, yes, a man." "Who was it?" "I don't know. He was a stranger to me." "Do you remember what he looked like?" Minnie thought for a moment. "He was a small guy, maybe around 35, she answered. "I think he had gaiters over his shoes, or maybe light tops. He seemed decent enough." "How soon after did you hear Dr. David fall?" "Almost immediately. First the door slammed, and then he collapsed." Poor old David. Dick had no doubt now that David had received some bad news and had been wrestling with some secret fear, alone and silently, in his bedroom ever since. Not even Lucy probably knew. Despite that, Dick decided to probe Lucy that evening. "Aunt Lucy," he asked, "do you know of anything that might have caused David's collapse?" "What sort of thing?" she replied cautiously. "A letter, maybe, or a visitor." When he saw she was only confused and trying to recall, he knew she couldn't help him. "Never mind," he said. "I was just looking for some explanation, that's all." He was convinced that Lucy knew as little as he did about David's visitor, and that David had kept everything to himself ever since. But the sense of looming disaster that came with the letter stayed with him. He went through his evening office hours almost on autopilot, part of his mind occupied with the puzzle. How did it change his plans? Was it even more crucial now to go to Walter Nola and explain the situation? He hated mysteries. He preferred clarity and openness. Yet an even stronger feeling emerged that he needed a sensible and unbiased perspective on his situation, fresh opinions, and impartial advice. He visited David before leaving, treating him with great care. With this new development, he saw David from a different perspective, facing and dreading something imminent. It hit him hard that he might need to clear things up to save David, who was clearly being crushed by some burden. He had called ahead, and Mr. Nola was waiting for him. Walter Nola thought he knew what was coming, and had already decided what he would say. He had rehearsed it while pacing alone with his loyal dog. "I like and respect you, Livingstone. If you're worried about these ridiculous rumors, let's drop it and move on. I know good character when I see it, and if it's all right with Elizabeth, it's all right with me." But things didn't go as planned. Dick came in, looking grave and clearly preoccupied. The first thing he said was, "I have a story to tell you, Mr. Nola. After you've heard it and given me your thoughts, I'll bring up a matter that, well, I can't discuss right now. If it's about the stupid gossip you've heard." "No, I don't care about that, but there is something else, something I haven't told Elizabeth, and that I need to tell you." Walter Nola straightened up, still smarting from Leslie's betrayal. "Don't tell me you're involved with another woman." "No, at least I don't think so. I don't know." Walter Nola likely didn't grasp many of the technical details that followed. Dick talked, and he listened, nodding here and there, trying hard to understand the core of the matter. It seemed curious rather than serious to him. The mind, indeed, was a strange thing. He'd need to read up on it. Occasionally, he interrupted Dick with a question, and Dick would pause to answer. For instance, "You haven't said anything to Elizabeth at all, about the walling off, as you call it." "No, at first, I was simply ashamed of it. I didn't want her to think I wasn't a normal guy." "I get it. Now that I'm telling you, I'm beginning to think this barrier I've put up is an unconscious way to forget something too painful to remember. It's almost always that way. I can't go to her with just that, can I? I need to know what it is first." "I thought there was an understanding between you two." Dick faced him directly. "There is. I didn't mean for it to happen. I was actually trying to stay away from her until I figured things out. But it just happened somehow. I guess that's how these things go." In the end, it was Walter Nola's decision to go with Dick to Norada once David could be safely left behind. The letter had influenced him. Before that, he had watched the situation unfold with a certain detachment, but now he saw it could disrupt the peace of two families. "It's definitely a warning." "Yes, without a doubt." "You don't recognize the name Bassett?" "No, I've tried, though." After some deliberation, they decided not to tell Elizabeth anything until they were ready to explain everything. Any resentment Walter Nola had felt about her being dragged into this mess faded as he looked at Dick's pale face and tired eyes. At 10 o'clock, the front door opened and closed, and Walter Nola got up and went into the hall. "Go on upstairs, Margaret," he said to his wife. "I've got a visitor." He didn't glance at Elizabeth. "Make yourself comfortable," he added, "and I'll be up soon. Where's Jim?" "I don't know. He didn't go to Nina's." "He started with you, didn't he?" "Yes, but he left us at the corner." They exchanged worried looks. Jim had been causing them some concern lately. It was strange how a man could go years with only work to worry about, his path straight forward through familiar fields where he reaped just what he sowed. As his family grew, new challenges and troubles crept in without warning. First, it was Nina, then Jim, and now this complicated situation involving Elizabeth. He wrapped his arm around his wife, pulling her close. "Don't worry about Jim, honey," he said. "He's fundamentally a good kid. He's just finding his way through the tricky phase between being a boy and becoming a man. He'll be fine." He watched his wife climb the stairs, his eyes filled with tenderness and concern. To him, she was simply Mom. In all their 24 years together, no other woman had ever crossed his mind. Elizabeth stood nearby, looking intently at him. "Is it Dick?" she asked softly. "Yes." "You don't mind, Dad, do you?" "I just want you to be happy," he said, his voice a bit strained. "You know that, right?" She nodded, tilting her face up for a kiss. She was completely certain that this conversation would confirm her lifelong commitment to Dick Livingstone. Her happiness and confidence shone brightly. He left her standing there and walked back into the living room, closing the door behind him.